I discovered my son had gotten married through Facebook. Not a phone call, not a text message, not even an impersonal email. Just a casual scroll through my feed on a Tuesday morning that revealed Michael and Amber beaming in formal wear, surrounded by smiling guests raising champagne glasses. Thrilled to finally call this beautiful woman my wife. Best day ever. Michael's caption read, accompanied by a heart emoji, and the date, 3 days earlier. My coffee cup froze halfway to my lips. My only child had gotten married, and I hadn't even known he was engaged. For a moment, I wondered if I'd missed an invitation, if perhaps a card had been lost in the mail, or an email had landed in my spam folder. But the sinking feeling in my stomach told me otherwise. I studied the photos with increasingly blurred vision. The ceremony looked lavish, an outdoor setting in Aspen with mountain views, elaborate floral arrangements, at least 100 well-dressed guests. I recognized several of Michael's college friends, a few of his co-workers, even his dentist. In one group shot, Howard's brother Robert and his wife were smiling in the second row. My brother-in-law had been invited. I had not. I set down my coffee and picked up my phone, dialing Michael's number with trembling fingers. The call went straight to voicemail. I left a message that sounded far calmer than I felt. Michael, it's Mom. I just saw the wedding photos online. I didn't know you were getting married. Please call me when you can. Over the next 2 weeks, I called 5 more times. Each call went unanswered. I sent 3 text messages, each one increasingly direct. Michael, please call me back. I'd like to understand what happened. I see you're posting honeymoon planning photos, so I know you're seeing these messages. Michael, I deserve at least an explanation. Please call your mother. When he finally answered on the 17th day, his voice carried the breezy indifference I'd grown accustomed to over the years. Hey, Mom. Sorry for the delay. It's been crazy with post-wedding stuff and work. How are you? As if we were having a routine check-in. As if I hadn't just discovered my only child's marriage through social media. Michael, I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. You got married. Yeah. It was kind of last minute, actually. Amber found this perfect venue with a cancellation, and we just decided to go for it. Last minute, I repeated. Yet you had time to invite over 100 people, including your Uncle Robert. A pause. It was mostly Amber's family and friends, and just a few key people from my side. Key people, I echoed, the words like stones in my mouth. But not your mother. Another pause, longer this time. Mom, we wanted something streamlined. Amber was really specific about the vibe she wanted. And I didn't fit the vibe, I said, the hurt transforming into something sharper. Don't be dramatic, Mom. It wasn't personal. It was just a small, intimate ceremony. With 100 guests. Look, Amber's family paid for most of it, so they had more say in the guest list. It's not a big deal. We can celebrate when we get back from the honeymoon. I closed my eyes, absorbing the casual cruelty of his dismissal. This was the son I had raised alone for 7 years before meeting Howard. The child I had worked 2 jobs to support when his biological father disappeared. The teenager whose college I had helped finance by deferring my own retirement. The adult who still called whenever his car needed repairs or his rent was due. I see, was all I could manage. Anyway, Michael continued, his tone brightening artificially, I should go. Amber and I are looking at honeymoon packages. We're thinking Thailand and Bali. Sounds expensive, I said automatically. Yeah, but worth it. Once-in-a-lifetime experience and all that. I'll call you soon, okay? He hung up before I could respond, leaving me with an empty dial tone and the hollow realization that my son hadn't even apologized for excluding me from the most significant day of his life. 3 days later, an email arrived with the subject line, honeymoon help. I opened it with a sense of dread that proved entirely justified. Mom, Amber, and I found an amazing package deal for Thailand and Bali, but we need to book ASAP. Could you loan us $15,000 to cover it? I know it's a lot, but with the life insurance money from Dad, it shouldn't be a problem for you. This would be a great way for you to participate in our wedding celebration since you missed the ceremony itself. We're planning to leave in 2 weeks, so let me know ASAP if you can transfer the funds. Thanks in advance, Michael. No inquiry about my feelings. No acknowledgement of the hurt he'd caused. Not even a perfunctory, how are you? Just a straightforward request for money, as if I were an ATM rather than a mother with a broken heart. I read the email 3 times, each reading revealing new layers of entitlement and emotional manipulation. The casual mention of Howard's life insurance, money meant to secure my future as a widow. The suggestion that financing their luxury honeymoon would somehow make up for being excluded from their wedding. The assumption that, despite everything, I would simply comply. For the first time in our relationship, something inside me shifted, a quiet but seismic reorganization of boundaries and expectations. I closed my laptop without replying and picked up my car keys. It was Tuesday, and I was due at Sunshine Meadows for my regular volunteer shift. Perhaps the seniors there would help me gain the perspective I suddenly, desperately needed. Sunshine Meadows Senior Living Center sat on the eastern edge of Portland, a modest one-story building with surprising warmth despite its institutional origins. I'd started volunteering there shortly after Howard's death, initially seeking distraction from grief, but eventually finding genuine purpose in the connections formed with residents. That Tuesday, I arrived earlier than usual, my mind still churning with Michael's email. Agnes, the volunteer coordinator, greeted me with her usual enthusiasm. Gladys, just in time. We're short-handed in the recreation room today. I followed her down the familiar hallway, past rooms where residents lived out their final chapters with varying degrees of family support. Some had children who visited daily, bringing grandchildren and home-cooked meals. Others received only obligatory holiday cards. A few had no one at all, their remaining days witnessed only by staff and volunteers like me. The recreation room buzzed with activity. A crafting session led by another volunteer. Colorful paper, scissors, and glue sticks covered tables where residents worked with concentration that belied stereotypes about aging attention spans. I helped Martha, a former librarian with arthritis-gnarled hands, cut paper for her greeting card project. "You're quiet today, Gladys," she observed, her faded blue eyes sharp with perception. "Something troubling you?" I hesitated, then found myself sharing the bare outline of Michael's wedding and subsequent email. Martha listened without interruption, her weathered hands still working methodically with the paper. "My son hasn't visited in 3 years," she said when I finished. "Sends a check to the facility every month but never comes himself. Says he's too busy." She glanced around the room. "Half the folks here have similar stories. Children who remember their inheritance but forget their parents." "Michael wasn't always like this," I said, feeling the familiar need to defend him despite everything. "We were close when he was younger." Martha nodded, understanding. "My Richard too. But money has a way of clarifying relationships. When my husband died, and Richard realized the house was being sold to pay for my care here, suddenly I became an obligation, rather than a mother." Her matter-of-fact tone contained no self-pity, just the hard-earned wisdom of someone who had already traveled the road I was just beginning to navigate. After my shift ended, I drove home slowly, Martha's words echoing in my mind. Had money clarified my relationship with Michael? The pattern was certainly there, his increasing distance after Howard's death coinciding with his knowledge of my improved financial situation, his calls becoming more transactional and less personal, his visits home invariably concluding with requests for loans that were never repaid. At home, I made tea and sat at my kitchen table, opening the memory box I kept of Michael's childhood, report cards, crayon drawings, school photos tracking his growth from gap-toothed boy to handsome young man. I remembered the child who had once brought me dandelions, clutched in his small fist, the teenager who had written me a heartfelt card for Mother's Day the year Howard and I married, thanking me for always putting me first. When had that child transformed into a man who could exclude me from his wedding and then casually ask for $15,000? Had I somehow facilitated that transformation with my own behavior? Howard had occasionally suggested I was too generous with Michael, too quick to bail him out of financial scrapes, too reluctant to let him face consequences. "You're not doing him any favors, Gladys," he'd say after I'd written yet another check to cover Michael's overdrawn account or credit card debt. "He needs to learn financial responsibility." But I'd always pushed back, defensive of my only child. "He's young. He's figuring things out. I just want to help him get established." Now, 5 years after Howard's death, Michael was 32, hardly a struggling youth finding his way. He had a good job, a new wife, and apparently enough social connections to fill a wedding venue in Aspen. What he didn't have, it seemed, was any genuine connection to his mother beyond what I could provide financially. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept rereading Michael's email, each word reinforcing the painful clarity of our relationship. By morning, I had made a decision. I showered and dressed with unusual care, as if preparing for an important meeting rather than a simple errand. At the bank, I sat across from Angela, the personal banker who had helped me manage Howard's estate after his death. 15,000, I confirmed when she asked the amount, but not to Michael's account. She looked up, surprised. We'd processed enough transfers to my son over the years that she likely assumed this was just another. I'd like to make a donation to Sunshine Meadows Senior Center, I continued. They need funding for their recreation program. Activities, outings, those little extras that make life worth living when options become limited. Angela nodded, processing the paperwork. Would you like this to be anonymous? I considered the question carefully. Anonymity would be easier, safer. Michael might never know what happened to the money he'd requested. Our relationship could continue in its familiar pattern of request and compliance. But that pattern had led us here, to a wedding I hadn't attended, and a relationship that existed primarily through financial transactions. No, I said finally. Please list it as a donation from Michael and Amber Thornton. Angela's eyebrows rose slightly, but she made the notation without comment. As I signed the final paperwork, a curious lightness settled over me, as if I'd set down a heavy burden I'd been carrying for years without realizing its weight. For the first time since seeing those wedding photos, I felt something like peace. Whatever came next would at least be honest, even if honesty carried its own kind of pain. The donation to Sunshine Meadows processed more quickly than I'd anticipated. By Friday, the recreation director, Elaine, had called to express effusive gratitude. Mrs. Thornton, we're absolutely overwhelmed by your generosity, she gushed. And how wonderful that your son and his new wife chose to celebrate their marriage with such a meaningful gift. We're featuring them in our monthly newsletter. I murmured appropriate responses, neither confirming nor denying the assumption that Michael and Amber had been involved in the decision. The conversation left me with conflicted emotions: pride in supporting a worthy cause, anxiety about the inevitable fallout, and a surprising undercurrent of satisfaction at having finally broken the pattern of capitulation that had defined my relationship with Michael for too long. The newsletter was published digitally the following Tuesday, with a print version distributed to residents and their families. The front page featured a cheerful announcement: Sunshine Meadows receives generous donation from newlyweds Michael and Amber Thornton. The accompanying article detailed how the funds would enhance recreation opportunities for residents, including art supplies, musical performances, and day trips to local attractions. I knew Michael would see it eventually. His Aunt Patricia, Howard's sister, volunteered occasionally at Sunshine Meadows and was undoubtedly on the email list. I just didn't expect the reaction to come quite so explosively or quickly. The call arrived Wednesday afternoon as I was deadheading roses in my small garden, the physical activity providing welcome distraction from anticipatory anxiety. What the hell did you do? Michael's voice, razor-sharp with fury, sliced through the peaceful afternoon. I straightened, brushing soil from my gardening gloves. Hello, Michael. Don't hello me. Aunt Patricia just forwarded me some newsletter with my name on a $15,000 donation I never made. What kind of game are you playing? I moved toward the patio chair, suddenly needing to sit down. It's not a game. You had no right to use our names. Do you have any idea how embarrassing this is? Amber's parents saw it. They know people who support that place. Of course, that would be his concern. The social embarrassment rather than the redirection of funds he'd requested. I thought it was an appropriate way for you to participate in the community, I said, borrowing his own phrasing from the honeymoon email, since I wasn't able to participate in your wedding. A sharp intake of breath. So this is punishment. Real mature, Mom. It's not punishment, Michael. It's a boundary. A boundary? He sounded genuinely confused by the concept. What are you talking about? I took a deep breath, choosing my words carefully. I'm talking about the fact that you excluded me from your wedding, but had no problem asking me for $15,000 immediately afterward. I'm talking about a relationship that seems to exist primarily when you need financial assistance. That's not fair. The defensive note in his voice was one I recognized from his teenage years. We've been busy. Life gets complicated. Not everything is about you. No, it's not, I agreed. But my money is about me, and I've decided to allocate it according to my values. This is insane. We were counting on that money, Mom. The honeymoon package is non-refundable if we don't put down the deposit by Friday. I'm sorry to hear that, I said, genuinely meaning it despite everything. Perhaps Amber's parents could help, since they were generous enough to host the wedding. The silence that followed told me more than words could have. Amber's parents hadn't hosted the wedding. Another lie in what was apparently a tapestry of deceptions. You know what? Michael's voice had turned cold. Keep your money. We don't need it, but don't expect to be part of our lives if this is how you're going to behave. The threat, intended to hurt, to punish, to force compliance, hung between us. In previous years, it would have worked. The fear of losing my only child would have sent me scrambling to fix things, to apologize, to write whatever check was necessary to maintain the fragile connection. Today, something had fundamentally shifted. I would love to be part of your lives, Michael, I said quietly, but not just as a financial resource. If you and Amber want a relationship with me, it needs to include respect, honesty, and mutual care. Unbelievable, he muttered. Dad would be so disappointed in you right now. The invocation of Howard, meant as a final emotional dagger, missed its mark. If anything, I felt my late husband's approval warming me from beyond. Actually, I said, I think Howard would be proud that I've finally taken his advice. He always said I needed to let you experience the natural consequences of your choices. Whatever. Enjoy your cats and your old people. Don't call us, we'll call you. The line went dead before I could respond. I sat in my garden for a long time afterward, the pruning shears forgotten in my lap, tears finally flowing freely down my cheeks. The pain was real, sharp and deep and unavoidable, but underneath it ran a current of something I hadn't expected. Relief. The pretense had ended. The relationship as it had existed, unbalanced, manipulative, increasingly hollow, had finally collapsed under its own weight. Whatever came next would at least be built on truth rather than comfortable fictions. And truth, however painful, was something I could finally face at 68 years old. That evening, I received an email from Sunshine Meadows with photos of residents enjoying a music performance funded by the recent donation. Their faces, lined with years but bright with joy, reminded me that connection and purpose existed beyond the narrow confines of my relationship with Michael. For the first time in decades, I allowed myself to consider that perhaps my world could expand rather than contract in these later years. Perhaps the end of one type of relationship could create space for others to flourish. I slept more peacefully that night than I had since seeing those wedding photos on Facebook. The burden of impossible expectations finally set down beside me rather than carried on my shoulders. The weeks following Michael's angry phone call passed with complete silence from his end. No texts, no calls, no social media messages. According to his Facebook page, which I still checked occasionally, he and Amber had downgraded their honeymoon plans from Thailand and Bali to a long weekend in San Diego. The photos showed forced smiles and carefully curated moments of supposed marital bliss. I felt the absence of communication like a physical ache, a phantom limb syndrome of maternal connection. Some mornings I woke reaching for my phone, certain he must have called overnight. Some evenings I composed lengthy emails explaining my position more clearly, only to delete them unsent. The urge to apologize, to make amends regardless of who was at fault, remained powerful despite my rational understanding of the situation. Martha's words from Sunshine Meadows echoed in my mind during these moments of weakness. Money has a way of clarifying relationships. The clarity was painful but necessary. I threw myself into volunteer work with renewed dedication, increasing my hours at Sunshine Meadows from 2 days a week to 4. The recreation program flourished with the influx of funds, expanding to include watercolor classes, a monthly outing to local cultural events, and visiting musicians twice a month. Residents who had previously spent days staring at television now engaged with activities and each other, their worlds expanding even as their physical capabilities diminished. You found your calling, Agnes observed one afternoon as we arranged chairs for a string quartet performance. You're different than when you first started volunteering here. Different how? I asked, genuinely curious. She considered me with thoughtful eyes, more present, less apologetic about taking up space. When you first came after your husband died, you were always looking over your shoulder, like you were waiting for permission to exist. Her assessment struck uncomfortably close to truth. How much of my life had I spent that way? Tentative, accommodating to a fault, arranging myself around others' needs and expectations. First as a single mother trying to prove I wasn't failing my son, then as a wife trying to be worthy of Howard's steady love, and finally as a mother to an adult son whose approval I continually sought through financial support. "I'm learning," I said simply. "About time," Agnes replied with the blunt honesty of someone who had survived enough decades to dispense with unnecessary politeness. None of us have enough years left to waste them being smaller than we are. October arrived with crimson leaves and early darkness. 6 weeks had passed since the donation, 6 weeks of silence from Michael that gradually transformed from acute pain to a dull background ache I was learning to live with. I began considering holiday plans that didn't revolve around accommodating his schedule, perhaps a volunteer shift at Sunshine Meadows for Thanksgiving, maybe even a small trip for Christmas. Then, on a rain-soaked Tuesday evening, my doorbell rang. Michael stood on my porch, collar turned up against the drizzle, face thinner than I remembered. No Amber beside him. "Can I come in?" he asked, his voice lacking its usual confidence. I stepped aside wordlessly, heart hammering as he entered the house he'd grown up in but hadn't visited in months. In the living room, he perched awkwardly on the edge of the sofa, declining my offer of tea. For several long moments, neither of us spoke, the sound of rain against windows filling the silence between us. "I lost my job," he finally said, staring at his hands. "Budget cuts, 2 weeks ago." I nodded, waiting for the rest, the inevitable request that I assumed had finally brought him to my door. "Amber's not happy, says I should have seen it coming, prepared better." A humorless laugh escaped him. "She's staying with her parents until I figure things out." The pieces assembled themselves in my mind. The financial pressure, the marital strain, the reluctant return to mother when other options had been exhausted. I steeled myself for the ask that would surely come next. Instead, Michael raised his eyes to meet mine directly. "I'm not here to ask for money." The statement hung between us, so unexpected that I wasn't sure I'd heard correctly. "I've been seeing a therapist," he continued. "Started a few weeks after our last conversation. Amber thought I needed it because I was so angry about the donation thing. But it's been educational." He shifted uncomfortably. "We've been talking about patterns, about entitlement, about how I've treated you, especially since Dad died." I remained silent, afraid to break whatever spell had brought this unfamiliar version of my son to my living room. "I'm not saying I understand everything yet, and I'm still hurt about how you handled the money, but I'm starting to see that maybe I haven't been fair to you." The admission, halting, imperfect, clearly difficult for him, was more than I had allowed myself to hope for. "The wedding thing," he continued, looking away again. "That was wrong. Amber pushed for it. She was worried you'd make a scene about the cost, say something embarrassing to her friends. But I should have stood up for you. I know that now. Thank you for saying that," I said quietly, when I trusted my voice not to break. "I can't change overnight," he warned, a flash of defensiveness returning. "And I'm not saying you were right about everything, but I'd like to, I don't know, start over maybe." The request contained both vulnerability and hope, a small bridge extending tentatively across the chasm that had opened between us. Not a complete resolution, not a perfect reconciliation, but a beginning. "I'd like that too," I said, finally allowing myself to cross the room and sit beside him. Not close enough to touch, we weren't there yet, but close enough to signal willingness to try. "I brought something," he said, reaching into his jacket pocket. He withdrew a small envelope and handed it to me. Inside was a check for $300, a tiny fraction of what he'd asked for the honeymoon, but significant in its symbolism. "It's for Sunshine Meadows," he explained. "Actually from me this time. My therapist suggested it might be healing, I guess, to contribute something real." The gesture, imperfect, modest yet genuine, brought tears to my eyes that I didn't try to hide. "Would you like to come with me sometime?" I asked. "See what they're doing with the donation?" He hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Yeah, maybe next week, if that works." It wasn't everything. The road ahead would undoubtedly contain setbacks, disappointments, the weight of ingrained patterns not easily broken. But as we sat together in the gentle percussion of rain against windows, I felt something shift between us. Something real beginning to grow in the space where pretense had been cleared away. Not the relationship I had long imagined, but perhaps one with greater potential for authenticity than what had come before. Michael's first visit to Sunshine Meadows occurred the following Tuesday. He arrived at the front entrance looking uncomfortable in business casual attire, clearly dressed to impress, despite being between jobs. I met him in the lobby, noting the nervous way he adjusted his collar and surveyed the institutional setting with barely concealed apprehension. "They don't bite," I assured him, attempting levity to ease his obvious discomfort. "Sorry," he mumbled. "Just never spent much time around old people. Besides you and Dad, I mean." The casual inclusion of me in the category of old people might once have stung. Today, I found it oddly refreshing, an acknowledgement of reality, rather than the careful avoidance of any reference to my age that had characterized our previous interactions. I led him through the facility, introducing him to staff and residents alike. To my surprise, he made a visible effort to engage, shaking hands and making appropriate small talk. Agnes raised an eyebrow when I introduced him as my son, Michael, the one from the donation, but refrained from commenting further. The recreation room was hosting a watercolor class funded by the donation. 12 residents sat at tables, carefully applying brushes to paper with varying degrees of dexterity but universal concentration. Martha, her arthritic hands wrapped around a special adaptive brush, was creating a surprisingly vibrant landscape. "This is all from your donation?" Michael asked quietly, surveying the scene. "Our donation," I corrected gently. "And yes, partly. The art supplies, the instructor's fee. They couldn't afford this before." We watched in silence as the instructor moved from table to table, offering encouragement and technical suggestions. The residents' faces reflected engagement and purpose that transcended physical limitations. "Mrs. Thornton," Martha called, spotting me. "Come see what I've done." I approached her table, Michael trailing behind. Her painting depicted a mountain landscape reminiscent of the Pacific Northwest wilderness, simple but effective, the colors bleeding together in ways that suggested both technical limitation and artistic intention. "It's beautiful," I said sincerely. "This must be your son," Martha observed, peering at Michael with unabashed curiosity. "The generous newlywed." A flush crept up Michael's neck. Yes. Nice to meet you." "Sit," she commanded, gesturing to the empty chair beside her. "Keep an old woman company while your mother helps Eleanor with her brush grip." To my astonishment, Michael complied without protest, lowering himself awkwardly into the chair designed for someone decades his senior. I moved to assist Eleanor at the next table, keeping Michael in my peripheral vision as Martha engaged him in conversation. I couldn't hear their exchange, but I watched my son's body language gradually relax, his initial stiffness giving way to more natural gestures as they spoke. At one point, Martha said something that made him laugh, a genuine sound I hadn't heard from him in longer than I cared to remember. The hour passed quickly. When the class concluded, Michael helped collect paintbrushes and clean water cups without being asked. Several residents thanked him personally for the generous donation, each expression of gratitude seemingly increasing his discomfort while simultaneously compelling him to engage more authentically. "That was not what I expected," he admitted as we walked to the parking lot afterward. "What did you expect?" He shrugged. "I don't know. Something depressing, I guess. People just sitting around waiting to die." "Some do," I acknowledged, "but most are still living while they're alive. That's what the recreation program is about. Making sure living continues to mean something more than just breathing." He was quiet for a moment, digesting this. "Martha's pretty sharp." "Yes, she is. What did you talk about?" A small smile. "She asked about Amber, and I mentioned we were having some issues. She told me her late husband once drove their car into a lake during an argument, and they still managed to stay married for 52 years. I laughed, picturing Martha delivering this anecdote with her characteristic dry wit. "Did she give you marriage advice?" "Sort of. She said the secret was knowing the difference between problems that matter and problems that don't." He hesitated, and she said something else. "About you." "Oh?" "She said you're different now, stronger, that volunteering here changed you." He glanced at me sideways. "Is that true?" The question held genuine curiosity rather than accusation. I considered it carefully as we reached our respective vehicles. "I think Howard's death changed me first," I said finally. "Losing him forced me to recognize my own impermanence. And yes, Sunshine Meadows changed me too, seeing people in their final chapters living with intention despite limitations. But the donation," I met his eyes directly. That decision changed me most of all, standing up for myself, even knowing I might lose you in the process. He flinched slightly but didn't look away. I'm seeing my therapist again tomorrow. Would it be okay if we talked more after that? Maybe dinner? The request, tentative without presumption, represented a small step toward the relationship I had always hoped for, not based on financial dependence or obligation, but on mutual respect and genuine connection. I'd like that, I said simply. As I watched him drive away, I felt cautious hope unfurling within me. Not the desperate hope of previous years, the silent prayer that financial support might somehow purchase genuine affection, but something more grounded, hope based on small, concrete changes rather than wishful thinking. That evening, I received a text from Michael. Thanks for today. It helped me understand some things. I read and reread the message, noting what it didn't contain. No request, no manipulation, no subtle guilt trip, just acknowledgement and gratitude. A small thing, perhaps, but foundations are built of small things carefully placed. The road ahead remained uncertain. Michael's marriage troubles, his unemployment, his lifetime of entitlement, none of these would resolve quickly or easily. My own patterns of enablement and conflict avoidance would require continued vigilance, but as I prepared for bed that night, I felt a sense of possibility that had been absent for too long. Whatever came next, we were at least beginning to see each other clearly, perhaps for the first time since he'd reached adulthood. It wasn't the relationship I had imagined all those years, but it held the potential to become something more authentic than what had come before. And at 68, I had finally learned that authenticity, however uncomfortable, was worth pursuing over comfortable illusions. Dinner with Michael became a weekly occurrence over the next month. We established a routine, Thursdays at 6, alternating between my home cooking and modestly priced local restaurants. The first few meals were characterized by careful conversation that avoided both the wedding incident and his increasingly strained marriage. We discussed neutral topics, books I was reading, news events, memories of Howard that felt safe to share. By the third dinner, something had shifted. Perhaps it was his continued therapy, perhaps my newfound resolve, or perhaps simply the space created by regular contact without financial transactions. Whatever the cause, our conversations began to deepen. Amber's moved back in, he mentioned over pasta at my dining room table. Temporarily, she says, we're evaluating our options. That sounds challenging, I offered, resisting the urge to probe or advise. He pushed a meatball around his plate. She's still angry about the honeymoon. Says if I'd stood up to you properly, we'd have had our dream trip. The old Michael would have echoed this sentiment, joining forces with his wife to position me as the villain. Today, he looked up with an expression I couldn't quite interpret. I told her that's not how it works anymore, that you're not an ATM with a mom's face on it. The phrase, clearly borrowed from his therapist, nonetheless represented a significant shift in perspective. I hid my surprise behind a sip of water. How did she take that? A rueful smile. About as well as you'd expect. She said I need to fix things with you because her parents can't keep supporting us both. And what did you say? That I am fixing things with you, just not the way she means. He set down his fork. I start a new job on Monday. Lower salary than before, but better work-life balance. I didn't tell Amber I'd been offered a higher-paying position that would have required 60-hour weeks. Chose the saner option instead. This decision, prioritizing well-being over status, making a choice Amber might not approve of, represented another small but significant departure from established patterns. I felt unexpected pride warming my chest. That sounds like a thoughtful choice, I said, careful not to overpraise what should be basic adult decision-making. Dad would have approved, Michael said quietly. He always said no amount of money was worth missing your life. The invocation of Howard, not as emotional manipulation, but as genuine reflection, created a moment of connection between us. For a fleeting second, I saw not just my adult son, but echoes of the thoughtful child he had once been. Our Thursday dinners continued through November, each one building incrementally on the foundation established the week before. Michael began volunteering occasionally at Sunshine Meadows, initially I suspected to impress me, but gradually with genuine engagement. He had a particular rapport with the male residents, who relished having a younger man to share stories with and occasionally trash-talk sports teams. Gerald used to be a structural engineer, he told me one evening, as we walked to our cars after a shared volunteer shift. He designed bridges all over the Pacific Northwest. His mind is still sharp as hell, even if his body's failing. It's weird to think about how much knowledge and experience is just sitting in these rooms, mostly ignored by the outside world. I glanced at him, struck by the observation's empathy and insight. That's what drew me to volunteering here after your father died. All these lives, all these stories. It helped me keep my own loss in perspective. The conversation paused as we reached the parking lot. An early December rain had begun, the fine mist catching in the security lights. Amber's moving out, Michael said abruptly. For real this time. She's taking an apartment with a friend from work. I absorbed this information, uncertain how to respond. I'm sorry, Michael. He shrugged, keys jingling in his hand. It's been coming for a while. We want different things. She's still focused on appearances, status, keeping up with her college friends. I'm just tired of living that way. Are you okay? I asked, genuinely concerned about his emotional state despite my private relief. Not really, he admitted with surprising candor. But I think I will be. My therapist says sometimes relationships run their course, and that's not necessarily a failure. Another borrowed phrase, but one he seemed to be genuinely processing rather than merely repeating. You're welcome to stay with me if you need a transition period, I offered impulsively. He seemed genuinely touched by the invitation, but shook his head. Thanks, but I think I need to handle this on my own. Figure out who I am without Amber, without depending on you. But maybe we could do Sunday dinners too, if that's not too much. The request, offered without presumption or manipulation, warmed me, despite the cold rain now falling more steadily. I'd like that, I said simply. 2 weeks later, Michael arrived for our regular Thursday dinner with a thick manila envelope. After we'd eaten, he placed it on the coffee table between us. I've been doing a lot of thinking, he began, uncharacteristically serious, about patterns, about money, about our relationship. My therapist suggested I do a full accounting of everything you and Dad have given me financially since college. He pushed the envelope toward me. It's all in here. Every check, every loan, every bill payment, everything I could document or remember. It comes to just over $78,000, not counting college itself. I stared at the envelope, unsure where this was heading. I can't pay it all back at once, he continued, but I've set up an automatic transfer from my checking account, $500 a month starting next week. Michael, that's not necessary. He held up a hand. It is, Mom. For me, if not for you. I need to do this, not just to repay the money, but to break the pattern. My therapist calls it making amends through changed behavior. The phrase sounded clinical, but the intention behind it felt genuine. I considered my response carefully, aware that dismissing his offer might undermine his attempt at growth. I appreciate the gesture, I said finally, but I don't want you to strain yourself financially, especially with the changes in your personal life. I've budgeted for it, he assured me. The new job is steady, and without Amber's spending habits, I'm actually more solvent than I've been in years. We reached a compromise. He would make the payments, but I would place them in a separate account that could be used for emergencies if needed, or eventually return to him for a significant life event, perhaps a down payment on a modest home of his own. As we finalized this arrangement, I realized how profoundly our dynamic had shifted in just a few months. The son who had once casually requested $15,000 for a luxury honeymoon was now insisting on repaying past support. The mother who had once enabled financial dependence was now helping establish a framework for independence. Not a perfect resolution, not a Hollywood ending, but something real and hopeful, growing in the space where honesty had cleared away pretense. Spring arrived in Portland with characteristic exuberance, cherry blossoms erupting in pink clouds, daffodils carpeting parks, and rain showers giving way to increasingly frequent sunshine. 6 months had passed since the wedding that had catalyzed our family transformation. Michael's divorce proceedings with Amber had concluded with surprising civility. His therapy continued, and our twice-weekly dinners had become a comfortable constant in both our lives. Sunshine Meadows was planning their annual spring celebration, a fundraising event that doubled as community outreach. As a key volunteer and significant donor, I had been asked to serve on the planning committee. We need younger volunteers, Agnes lamented during one planning session. The same aging crowd shows up each year. We need fresh energy, new connections. Without thinking, I replied, my son might be able to help. He's good with technology and has been volunteering regularly. The words emerged naturally, without the apologetic tone that once characterized any reference to Michael. No longer was I the mother making excuses for an absent son or inflating minor interactions into evidence of devotion. Now I simply stated facts. Michael volunteered. Michael had skills to offer. Michael might help. When I mentioned the event to him over our next dinner, his response surprised me. "Actually, I've already been talking with Agnes about it," he said, serving himself another portion of the vegetable stir-fry I'd prepared. "I'm setting up their registration system and designing a digital program to save on printing costs." This independent initiative, connecting with Sunshine Meadows outside of our shared volunteer shifts, offering his professional skills without prompting, represented another small but significant evolution in his engagement with the world beyond his immediate needs. "That's wonderful," I said sincerely. "Agnes will be thrilled." He nodded, chewing thoughtfully. "I was thinking about something else, too. The recreation program has been such a success, but it's limited by physical space, right? What if we created a digital companion? Virtual classes, online performances, ways for residents to connect with the outside world when they can't physically leave the facility?" The suggestion revealed both practical insight and genuine concern for the residents he'd come to know over the past months. I felt a surge of pride that had nothing to do with my own influence and everything to do with the person he was becoming. "That sounds like an excellent idea. Have you mentioned it to Elaine?" "Not yet. I wanted to develop the concept more fully first." He hesitated. "Actually, I was hoping you might collaborate with me on it. You know the residents better, understand their limitations and interests. We could work on it together." The invitation to partner as equals on a meaningful project was unprecedented in our adult relationship. Previously, our interactions had been transactional. His requests for money, my compliant provision, or obligatory holiday gatherings, occasional phone calls. Never had we engaged as collaborative adults with shared purpose. "I'd like that very much," I said, emotion making my voice slightly unsteady. We spent the weeks leading up to the spring celebration, developing both the immediate event logistics and the longer-term digital connection program. Working together revealed complementary strengths, my insight into the residents' needs and capabilities, Michael's technical expertise and project management skills. We disagreed occasionally but productively, each bringing perspectives the other lacked. The event itself exceeded expectations. Nearly 200 community members attended, including families with children, local business owners, and potential donors. The recreation room had been transformed with spring flowers and artwork created by residents. Live music, refreshments, and interactive activities created a festive atmosphere that belied stereotypical assumptions about senior living facilities. I found myself moving comfortably through the crowd, introducing residents to visitors, highlighting program successes, and occasionally catching glimpses of Michael doing the same across the room. At one point, I overheard him earnestly explaining our digital connection concept to a local tech entrepreneur, his passion for the project evident in his animated gestures. "Your son has become quite an advocate," Martha observed, appearing beside me in her wheelchair. "Quite a change from the reluctant visitor I met last fall." "Yes," I agreed simply, watching as Michael knelt to help a resident navigate the digital program display he'd created. "And you," Martha continued, her perceptive gaze assessing me. "You've changed too. You stand taller, speak with more certainty. The apologetic shadow is gone." Her observation echoed Agnes's from months earlier, confirming a transformation I had felt but not fully articulated to myself. The woman who had discovered her son's wedding on Facebook, who had fled to a motel rather than confront painful realities, who had measured her worth by her ability to financially support an entitled adult child. That woman had gradually been replaced by someone more authentic, more self-assured, more willing to occupy her rightful space in the world. The event concluded with a brief ceremony recognizing significant volunteers and donors. To my surprise, Agnes called both Michael and me to the small podium. "The Thornton family has transformed our recreation program," she announced to the assembled crowd, first through their generous donation and then through their ongoing commitment of time, expertise, and creative vision. Gladys and Michael represent the intergenerational connection that keeps Sunshine Meadows vibrant and forward-looking. As we stood side by side acknowledging the applause, Michael leaned slightly toward me. "I'm proud of us," he said quietly, his words nearly lost in the clapping, "of what we're building. The simple statement encompassed far more than our work at Sunshine Meadows. It acknowledged the relationship we were carefully reconstructing, not the fantasy connection I had long pretended existed, nor the purely financial arrangement it had deteriorated into, but something authentic growing in the space where honesty had cleared away pretense. Later, as we helped with cleanup after most guests had departed, Michael approached with an envelope. "I was going to wait, but today seems right," he said, handing it to me. Inside was a card containing a printout of a flight itinerary. "Portland to London, September 15th, I read, confused. "What is this? Remember how you always talked about visiting the gardens at Kew? And the British Museum?" His expression held both excitement and uncertainty. "I've been saving. It's not Thailand and Bali, but I thought maybe we could take that trip together, if you want." The invitation represented everything the honeymoon request had not. Thoughtfulness rather than entitlement, consideration of my interests rather than his own, a genuine desire for shared experience rather than financial exploitation. "I'd love that," I said, the simple words inadequate to express the fullness in my heart. As we finished cleaning up and prepared to leave, several residents stopped to thank us personally. Martha, her arthritic hands clutching a painted fan from the craft table, caught Michael's sleeve. "You're becoming a good man," she told him bluntly. "Better late than never." His startled laugh contained both acknowledgement and humility. "Thanks, I think. And you," she continued, turning to me. "You're finally allowing it, instead of enabling something less." Her assessment, direct, unvarnished, penetrating to the heart of our journey, left us both momentarily speechless. But as we walked to our cars under a sky transitioning from sunset to dusk, I recognized the profound truth in her observation. By redirecting that honeymoon money months ago, I had unwittingly created space for something far more valuable to grow. Not just the recreation program that now enriched dozens of lives at Sunshine Meadows, but the authentic relationship with my son that had previously seemed impossible. Some gifts, it seemed, came disguised as acts of courage rather than compliance. The London trip evolved from simple idea to concrete plan over the summer months. Michael and I met regularly to research gardens, museums, and historical sites, our shared anticipation building with each decision made. We would spend 10 days in early September, dividing our time between London proper and day trips to surrounding areas. The itinerary reflected both our interests, my love of gardens and art, his newfound appreciation for history and architecture. "I never really traveled with purpose before," he admitted during one planning session at my kitchen table, laptop open to a virtual tour of Kew Gardens. "With Amber, it was always about luxury hotels and Instagram moments. This feels different, like we're going to experience something, not just document it for other people's approval." This self-awareness, the ability to recognize previous patterns without self-justification, represented one of many small but significant shifts in his perspective over the past year. His therapy continued, though reduced to bi-weekly sessions, and he often shared insights from this work during our regular dinners. My 79th birthday arrived in August, just weeks before our scheduled departure. To my surprise, Michael organized a small celebration at Sunshine Meadows. Nothing elaborate, just cake and tea in the recreation room with residents and staff who had become important figures in both our lives. No expensive gifts, no grand gestures, just thoughtful presence and genuine connection. Martha, now using a motorized wheelchair due to her advancing arthritis, presented me with a watercolor she had created, a garden scene with remarkable depth despite her physical limitations. "For after your trip," she explained, "so you can remember what you saw through an old woman's imagination." The gift, personal, meaningful, created with effort rather than merely purchased, moved me deeply. Michael, observing my emotional response, squeezed my hand briefly, a small gesture of understanding that would have been unimaginable a year earlier. As our departure date approached, practical preparations intensified. Packing lists were created, house-sitting arrangements made, responsibilities at Sunshine Meadows temporarily reassigned. The digital connection program Michael had conceived was now fully operational, allowing us to virtually check in with residents during our absence. 2 days before our flight, an unexpected email arrived from Amber. I hadn't heard from her since the divorce finalized 6 months earlier, her communication limited to practical matters handled through attorneys. The message was brief and surprisingly cordial. "Gladys, Michael mentioned your upcoming trip to London. I wanted to wish you both a wonderful journey. Despite everything, I'm glad to hear you've rebuilt your relationship. Some good came from all the changes, it seems. Safe travels, Amber. I showed the message to Michael during our final pre-trip dinner, uncertain how he would react to this communication from his ex-wife. That's surprisingly mature, he said after reading it twice. Her therapist's influence, probably. She started seeing someone after we separated. You're still in touch? I asked, careful to keep any judgment from my tone. Occasionally. Portland's not that big a city. We run into each other sometimes. He handed back my phone. It's civil now. We both recognize we wanted different things. She's dating some corporate lawyer who can give her the lifestyle she wants. Seems happy. His matter-of-fact assessment, free from bitterness or self-pity, offered further evidence of his emotional growth. The Michael of a year ago would have painted himself as either victim or hero in the divorce narrative. Today's Michael simply acknowledged the reality of incompatible values and goals. The journey to London passed with surprising ease despite the length. We navigated airports and flight transfers with complementary skills, my patience with administrative details balancing his technological facility with check-in systems and navigation apps. By the time we reached our modest but comfortable hotel in South Kensington, any concerns I'd harbored about traveling together had largely dissipated. London embraced us with mercurial September weather, misty mornings giving way to occasional sunshine before returning to characteristic drizzle. We adjusted our itinerary accordingly, moving between indoor and outdoor attractions as conditions permitted. Kew Gardens under clearing skies, the British Museum during afternoon showers, a boat trip on the Thames when the sun broke through unexpectedly. Throughout these experiences, I observed Michael with quiet wonder. The son who had once been perpetually distracted by his phone, always half present and scanning for the next thing, now engaged fully with each moment. He studied Japanese moss arrangements at Kew with the same attention he gave to Roman artifacts at the museum. He conversed thoughtfully with tour guides, asked insightful questions, and frequently checked if I needed to rest without making me feel elderly or burdensome. On our 5th day, we visited Hampton Court Palace, where Henry VIII's magnificent gardens stretched toward the Thames under a rare cloudless sky. As we walked the meticulously maintained paths, Michael asked about my early years with Howard, questions he had rarely shown interest in before. Dad told me once that you were the one who taught him about gardens, he said as we paused beside an elaborate topiary. That before he met you, he couldn't tell a daffodil from a dandelion. I smiled at the memory. Your father was a city boy through and through when we met, but he was willing to learn about things that mattered to me. That was one of his greatest gifts, genuine curiosity about other people's passions. I wish I'd paid more attention to that quality in him, Michael admitted. I was always focused on his practical skills, his financial advice. I missed the deeper lessons. You're noticing now, I said gently. That counts for something. We continued walking, the palace a magnificent backdrop to our conversation. After a comfortable silence, Michael spoke again. I've been thinking about what happened with the honeymoon money. How angry I was when you donated it to Sunshine Meadows. I tensed slightly, uncertain where this was heading. It was the best thing you could have done, he continued, surprising me. Not just for the residents, but for me, for us. It forced me to see patterns I'd been blind to for years. The acknowledgement, offered without prompting in this beautiful garden thousands of miles from home, felt like the closing of a circle that had begun with that Facebook discovery of his wedding nearly a year earlier. I'm not saying I handled everything well after that, he added with rueful self-awareness, but it was a necessary disruption, like when they do controlled burns in forests so new growth can happen. The metaphor struck me as particularly apt, the painful burning away of unhealthy patterns, creating space for something more authentic to emerge from the cleared ground. As we completed our circuit of the gardens and headed toward the palace interior, I felt profound gratitude, not just for this beautiful trip, but for the journey of transformation that had made it possible. The difficult decision to redirect that honeymoon money had indeed been a controlled burn, painful, but ultimately regenerative. Thank you for this trip, I said simply as we paused in the palace courtyard. Not just the London part, the whole journey. Michael's smile held understanding beyond the literal interpretation of my words. Thank you for making it possible. All of it. In that moment, surrounded by centuries of history yet focused entirely on our present connection, I recognized that we had both finally learned to value the most precious currency of all, not money, but authentic relationship built on mutual respect rather than obligation or exploitation. Some lessons, it seemed, were worth every painful step of the learning. Our return to Portland brought predictable readjustment, jet lag, mail accumulation, the mental shift from vacation mindset to daily routine. Yet beneath these surface transitions ran a deeper current of change. London had transformed our relationship in subtle but significant ways, solidifying the foundation we had been carefully rebuilding over the previous year. The first indication came when Michael helped carry my luggage inside, then refused my invitation to stay for dinner. "You need rest, Mom," he said, his concern genuine rather than performative. "I'll check in tomorrow, but tonight should be about you getting settled." This thoughtful boundary, prioritizing my needs over his desire for company, represented another small evolution in our dynamic. The Michael of previous years would have accepted without consideration of my fatigue, or worse, made his departure feel like rejection, requiring my emotional labor to smooth over. Today's Michael simply recognized my need for recovery time as valid and acted accordingly. Sunshine Meadows welcomed us back with enthusiasm, residents eager to hear about our adventures and see the photographs we had carefully documented for sharing. We scheduled a formal presentation in the recreation room for the following week, complete with British-themed refreshments and a slideshow Michael had created. The event drew nearly every ambulatory resident, plus several in wheelchairs, assisted by staff. Martha claimed a front-row position, her sharp eyes missing nothing as we alternated narrating our experiences. When we described the magnificent glasshouses at Kew Gardens, she leaned forward in her wheelchair, absorbing every detail of structures she would never personally visit. "It's like you took us all with you," she commented afterward, studying the photographs we had printed for the bulletin board. Not just pretty pictures, but the stories behind them, the feeling of being there. Her observation captured something essential about how we had approached the journey. Not as consumers of experience or collectors of impressive destinations, but as attentive witnesses bringing back detailed observations for those who could not make such journeys themselves. As fall progressed toward winter, our twice-weekly dinners evolved to include occasional gatherings with friends from Michael's expanding social circle. He had begun building connections independent of Amber's influence, relationships based on shared interests rather than status considerations. These new friends included a history teacher from a local high school, a physical therapist who volunteered at Sunshine Meadows, and a graphic designer who helped with promotional materials for the senior center. During one such gathering at my home in early November, I overheard Michael describing our London trip to his friend Ethan. "It was different from any travel I'd done before," he explained, unaware I was listening from the kitchen. "Not about checking boxes or impressing people, but really experiencing a place together. My mom knows so much about gardens. Watching her at Kew was like seeing someone completely in their element. I realized I'd never really paid attention to that side of her before." The observation, offered not to impress me, but in genuine conversation with a friend, contained a quality of seeing that had long been absent from our relationship. Michael wasn't just acknowledging my preferences, but recognizing me as a complete person with expertise and passions independent of my role as his mother. Thanksgiving approached with its inevitable consideration of holiday plans. In previous years, these discussions had been fraught with expectation and obligation. This year, Michael raised the subject with simple directness during a volunteer shift at Sunshine Meadows. "I was thinking about Thanksgiving," he said as we arranged chairs for a musical performance. "Agnes mentioned their short staff that day. What would you think about volunteering in the morning, then having our own dinner later?" The suggestion, considering both community needs and our personal celebration without presumption or obligation, offered yet another indicator of our evolving relationship. "That sounds perfect," I replied, genuinely pleased with the proposal. Thanksgiving Day dawned with clear, cold sunshine. We spent the morning at Sunshine Meadows, helping serve a special meal to residents whose families couldn't or wouldn't visit. Michael moved comfortably among the elderly diners, remembering preferences, engaging in conversations, demonstrating ease with the very population he had once admitted avoiding. Martha joined us at a table near the window, her mobility increasingly limited, but her mind sharp as ever. "A year makes quite a difference," she observed, glancing between Michael and me. Last Thanksgiving, neither of you mentioned the other. Now look at you, a proper family." Her characteristic directness highlighted the journey we had traversed, from estrangement and exploitation to genuine connection. The wedding that had excluded me, the honeymoon money redirected to Sunshine Meadows, the painful confrontations and gradual rebuilding, all steps on a path that had led to this quiet moment of shared purpose. That evening, in my dining room with autumn light fading outside, Michael and I enjoyed our own modest Thanksgiving dinner. No elaborate production, no performance of familial harmony for social media documentation, just authentic appreciation for the meal and each other's company. Over pumpkin pie, his contribution, homemade rather than store-bought, Michael raised his water glass in a simple toast to choices that seemed hard at the time but led exactly where we needed to go. The acknowledgement of both past difficulty and present gratitude encapsulated our journey with perfect economy. I touched my glass to his, words unnecessary between us. Later, as he prepared to leave, Michael paused at the door. "Almost forgot. I have news. I've been approved for a mortgage. It's a small condo in Selwood. Nothing fancy, but it's mine. Well, will be mine after 30 years of payments." This milestone, a modest home purchased within his actual means rather than aspirational lifestyle, represented perhaps the most concrete evidence of his changed relationship with money and status. "That's wonderful news," I said sincerely. "When do you close?" "December 15th. I was hoping maybe you'd help me pick out some furniture? Nothing expensive, just the basics to start. I value your eye for these things." The invitation to participate in this new beginning without financial obligation offered a glimpse of the future we were building. Not dependence disguised as closeness, not obligation masquerading as care, but genuine desire for shared experience and mutual support. "I'd be honored," I replied, meaning every word. As I watched him drive away, under stars just beginning to emerge in the darkening sky, I reflected on the extraordinary journey of the past year. From discovering my exclusion from his wedding to helping furnish his first home. From fleeing to a motel in pain and confusion to standing confidently in my own truth. From enabling financial dependence to fostering mutual respect. The decision to redirect that honeymoon money had indeed been the pebble that started an avalanche of change. Painful, disruptive, ultimately transformative. Not just for Sunshine Meadows, where the recreation program continued to thrive, but for both Michael and me as we discovered who we could be when authentic connection replaced comfortable illusion. Some gifts, it seemed, were worth far more than their monetary value. Some redirections led precisely where we needed to go.